So when Mikael Tiberg called me, he said, Magnus, I want you to talk about gamification because I know you work with that a little bit. So yeah, okay, and we sort of, I gave him a first draft and an abstract, and he said, well, the title is too short. So the result, after some discussion back and forth, became this extremely long title of the presentation, and I can't even read it from the start to the end. But it tells, if you look at the words there, what the presentation is all about. It's going to be about gamification. It's going to be about what's behind gamification, why gamification, that is motivation. And what we want to achieve most of the time with gamification, that is learning. And we also want to get the brain involved. When we learn, we usually use our brain, but we can actually use other parts of our body as well. So-called motor learning, which to a lesser extent involves at least the cortex of the brain, if you would like to go into details. But it summarizes most of what's going to be presented here tonight. And, well, who am I then? Why me? I am, as I said, Magnus, and my company is called Edubrain. I work with brain health in different ways. Education, I also help and consult to the industry about how to measure brain health, for example, stress and emotions in various products, such as these products, as I'm sure some of you already have tried or have and utilize, because that's the next frontier. So that's what I really enjoy. And also it's about brain health at work, and what I'm going to talk about tonight, motivation and the parts of motivation, gamification, where you use gamification to motivate people, and also retention and feedback principles and so on. So, but I'm going to start with a challenge to you. I want to ask you, I'm going to ask you in the end of this presentation, and I can assure you there's going to be a prize if someone is interested. And it's not the beers that are left, but it's something real that you can bring home, and it's not going to vanish after tonight. That's how would you enable not only learning, but also a change in a user, in someone who wants to have a task, who has a task at hand, a learning task, for example. So not only learning, but also a change, a real change. Because learning, you can learn without change, but if you go with both of them, you change the perception of the user. You have reached a bit further, I would say. So how would you do that? Any good examples? After the presentation, you will receive a prize. I have a book here for you, which is called The Non-Stop Lover. And it's about the brain. So this is cases where of patients that I've met and who experienced just exactly that. They had to relearn and adapt. That's what I write about here. Gamification. Well, gamification is the basic crude definition of gamification is really to apply game mechanics into a non-game setting or a non-game task. And the purpose is to enhance, for example, learning, innovation, productivity, or loyalty. And one of the first examples of gamification, and I think it's well known to most people, is this frequent flyer program. The frequent flyer program, every airline today has frequent flyer programs, and you can understand it in the form that traveling is not originally a game, but when you move into this site and you book your trips, you will also enter into sort of a game where you earn badges or points, you can gain rewards, you can buy things from these points, you can actually travel using these points. And that is one of the best or first examples, at least, of gamification in the context and in the application that we refer to today. But of course, gamification, if you want to, it has started a long way back in time. But this is sort of the way that we would like to define it today. Now, I would like to start to talk about motivation, because motivation is really what you want to get at when you design something, a game in a non-game setting, setting up gamification. Motivation, what is that? Well, it's an internal process that activates and guides and maintains goal-directed behavior over time. It involves biological, cognitive, social, emotional factors. And there are, you could say crudely, three major components behind motivation. And the first one is to activate it. The other one is the persistence part. How do you maintain it, if you would like? And the third level is the intensity. How intensely motivated are you? And when you talk about factors influencing motivation, there are two major ones. One, the extrinsic, and the other, intrinsic factors. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Here is a description of extrinsic and intrinsic factors. Extrinsic means whatever factors comes from the outside, and intrinsic what comes from within. So extrinsic is, for example, that you earn points or badges, gold stars. It's entering a competition with your friends or with unknowns. It's about perhaps earning money or other forms of rewards, but it's also the fear of punishment if you fail, or fear of failure in general. While intrinsic factors is that whatever comes from the inside, your curiosity, a sense of meaning or meaningfulness with a task, whatever you enter into sort of a task that you would like to perform, what does it mean to you? It's about learning, it's about autonomy, about love, it's about fun and enjoyment, and also identity, personal and professional identity. It may also be an intellectual challenge. That's a definition of what is intrinsic, coming from the inside. Now, so very short about the theoretical framework behind motivation, because it's not that relevant. But there, as I said, it was a behavioral part, that's the rewards. It's a cognitive part which appeals to the intrinsic mechanisms, what you think, what you perceive, the plans and the goals that you have. It's a humanistic part, and there one of the more famous scientists in this area called Maslow was active, and he created the Maslow pyramid of needs, as I'm very sure that you are aware of. That's what comes from the inside, your drive for food and shelter and warmth and so on. And that's a social cultural aspect as well. That's, you know, attributional theory and perceived cause of success or failures. What happens, or what in the social cultural context to your network if you fail or succeed. And it's also about where you are and the responsibility and so on. So that's the theoretical part. Comes very far away from gamification. But here, Maslow's pyramid of needs, actually. The very basic at the bottom for survival, and the further you go upwards in the pyramid, the more sort of intellectual and refined you become, and self-actualization is the upper one, when you have all other needs fulfilled. Now, here, what influences motivation? That is important, because now we're coming into what you maybe will be developing, working with when you're developing gamification software. That is, you need to be aware of personality factors. What is the target population? What's really their preferences, and why do they involve in this kind of situation or game, and how do they react to various cues and so on. It's also about self-regulation. You know, it's also about how do you drive yourself and control yourself. It's also about social influences and the task design itself. So a lot of things influence and affect motivation. Now, I'm actually very briefly going to mention this, because this is even more intellectual if you would like, but you have to create motivational conditions when you set up your game, if you would like. And you need to make sure that you get the user started, You have to maintain them and encourage positive or retrospective self-evaluation. Now, this comes into my backyard a little bit more. What happens when you're motivated in the brain? Well, some areas light up like there was a candle in the middle of the brain. This is a so-called functional magnetic resonance imaging picture of a gamer who is very motivated. You can see that there are central parts of the brain that are lit. That means they are very active in this person. And everyone here has been motivated at one or the other stage, really driven by something, wanting to get to that point, you know. And when you are in that zone of highly motivated state, that's what happens in the brain. Some areas very deep down in the brain, but still in the big brain, they are lit up and activated, so to speak. Not lit up physically, but they are activated. And what's behind that? That's the dopamine system, or some would say in a behavioral sense, the reward system. So because you're striving for something that you know will reward you, and when it rewards you, there you'll get a flush of dopamine in the brain. And you can achieve that in other ways, for example, by drinking alcohol. That's also another way of getting that flush of dopamine in the brain, or other drugs. That's not part of today's discussion because that's an artificial and also potentially dangerous way of manipulating with the brain. But when you play a game, biology is in control most of the time, at least if you play sensibly. And then you activate your brain and you get a flush, a burst of dopamine in the frontal lobes of the brain. And you're in the zone, you're driven, activated, you're almost not aware of what you're doing, but you're really having a good time. So, gamification then. Well, I told you it's about using game mechanics in non-game contexts. This is perhaps what we think about when we go back to gamification. We think about selling, at least that was the first idea I had of gamification. Why would you do it? It's got something with selling and gaining money and so on. But it's actually, as you now know, much more. But this is one program, a Salesforce program, where one of their top sellers displays how much he has sold for a while. And in this portal, he displays his ranking in various aspects of his sales, and also which level he is at, and which rewards or achievements he has gotten, and also followers and so on, and support. Here's detail on achievements. This is coming into how you would design sort of a portal for a gamification setup. So it includes the basic elements of what we usually include when we talk about gamification. We talk about rewards, we talk about some kind of ranking, we talk about a level, status, he's a black belt salesman, and achievements, and also the network or followers, and maybe also team and so on. So this is a little bit crude, an extreme example, but it's still, that's exactly what gamification is about. It includes the elements there. So others are supposed to log in and look at this top salesman and want to know, why is he the top salesman here in this organization? What does he do that makes him the top salesman? And they can interact with him, they can ask him questions, they can learn from him, they can become part of his network if they would like, and then they can sort of gain status by becoming part of his network and so on. So what that is, it's putting a game in a sort of non-game context. And if you go back all the way to what game aspires to be, game is a structured play. So play is spontaneous, but there's no rules, no goals, no structure, no real world outcome. It's not within a system. take the example of a kid playing with tools, suddenly deciding to design something, but then decides to change the rules, change the context whenever he wants or she wants. It's totally random. It's happening in the fantasy or in the brain of this little kid here. While a game is not spontaneous because you have preset the rules, right? And you have set the goals, it's structured, and so on, but it's still not a real-world outcome. So when you move into gamification, gamification is a game with real-world outcomes. So, and it's also within a system. So I've taken this picture from a famous movie and book, and that's sort of one extreme, if you would like, because suddenly a game came into a real-world situation, more or less, very dramatically so. But it's a good example to keep in mind, if you would like, but not aspire to develop, I would say. Here, gamification techniques. Those of you who have worked with this are well familiar with it, and those of you who know gamification knows it well, and I've mentioned several of them, but it's about, you know, achievement badges, levels. For example, when I move, I haven't reached my target today with this device that I have, but if I walk a little bit more here on stage, perhaps it will say bling, and then I have reached my first badge for today, and I feel happy. It's about achievement level. So if I walk here tomorrow and the day after, even though no one will still be here, I get to another level. I walk a lot and I gain more and more. Perhaps I will reach the leaderboard one day with my activity. For sure, there should be a progress bar so I can follow from day to day how much I've walked, how much I've developed, my skills, or whatever I want to develop in me. And perhaps also I can, you know, use a virtual currency to buy myself something useful or not useful. There's systems for awarding, redeeming, trading. I can trade my currency or my badges perhaps with someone else. I can give them away to someone if I want to, charity. And I can create challenges. I challenge my friend, okay, I'm going to walk more than you in this week for sure. What about it? We can compete about 10,000 virtual not coin currency. And then we can also embed small casual games. That's part of the bigger game, but it's a small game within. So think about Minecraft, for example, where you have a lot of small games within that bigger game environment or construction environment, if you would like. So this is moving further away from Salesforce into something that, well, at least I haven't 10 years ago associated with games, and that's project management. But you can put it also there. Same components, same setup, same aspiration to motivate and drive the users to perform more, to compete, to leverage and to send their products in time before deadlines and so on. And also to use the leaderboards to drive and the badges to award and so on. This is yet another example. Now we're moving to health. And here it's about personal health, trying to stimulate to meditation, which is supposed to make you relax and cope with stress, right? So also in that setting, you can use different let's say programs if you want, or games you want to go into. You can learn more about it, and you can see about your profile. Here are what your score is, and the total number of sessions you've done, and so on. And here is the, let's say, progress bar. Where are you on this one? And the next session is planned at this level, level 10, and so on and so on. It's old, as I said. I talked about frequent flyers. This is yet another old example of stamps that were used in the US from the 1930s up to the 1970s or 80s, where you could buy actually gas for these stamps. And you could trade them as well and change between buyers or users of these. These are many more examples. LinkedIn, Dropbox, Foursquare, and so on. And coming to the essentials, so Bengt talked about the money that is put into the healthcare business, and which some of you may aspire to get a little piece of to be able to develop your software or your company, and to also have a sort of a benefit to patients and to sufferers, which is a good goal. And you can see that it's about a 2.8 billion industry, gamification today, and 70% of all the top companies that Forbes Global 2000 companies surveyed are somehow developing gamification models for their users today. So it's big business, you could say. Now, there are some things to be aware of, legal restrictions when you get into this. So you have to think about privacy laws. So the data that you collect about users, what are you going to do with that data? How are you going to handle that? It's not something that you can be completely unaware of, and you cannot deal with it in any way you like. There are laws that regulate that, and different laws in different countries, of course. There's also labor law. If you are in a company and if you have a gamification program, does it mean that you're working when you're involved in that, or is it something else? Now, ownership and control of intellectual property as well. So the data is something that someone owns or not owns. Maybe everybody owns it that's involved in this program. You have to think about that as well. And also, if there is a product or if there is something that is developed within that system. So, for example, innovative gamification setups. Who's going to own whatever products that comes out of that? What about the use of virtual currencies and virtual assets? Well, these might be used by criminals or fraudsters that also engage in the same program, but with a very different purpose. So that's also something that you need to consider. Now, there's also, as I'm sure you are aware of, criticism all the time. Whenever you do something, whenever you say something, there's going to be someone that thinks differently or even criticizes it. And you have to be, I mean, what it points to, the criticism, is what's really essential with gamification. But if you create a game that's not fun, it's not gamification. It doesn't work. So fun is really, enjoyment is really part of it. And it's also about an artificial sense of achievement that someone says. That's really not working. If you have to move away from that and create a real sense of achievement when you do it. For example, when you learn a new language with Duolingo, for example, that's sort of a real sense of achievement. You reach a level, it means something real to you. You master the language in a clearly better way than before. And it's also what is also, I want to say, that is proposed for gamification is to make sure that you think about the story, not only the setting, but creating a story that is attractive for the user. Also, it can be flawed and misleading, and some say it also only benefits corporate interest over that of ordinary people. So think about that when you develop a program. If you're into education, I think it's easier, but if you're into, for example, a corporate program, loyalty program or something like that, that's part of what you have to consider when you develop it. Now back to the brain. This is a brain or two. It's the same brain twice, and it's also essential when you create a gamification program. It is to get the user actively involved. If you feed them too much, you could say, this is watching Netflix, and this is doing Minecraft. So the more light, the better for the brain. The more you will develop your brain, if you would like. So, and it's not trivial, and it's a real problem for, I think, kids of today. If you're working with kids, to make sure that they're not passively fed with information, but they should be actively involved. That also, the same situation applies to someone watching a game, but is not actively involved in the game. So think about also these aspects as you work on your gamification programs. Now, there's very many alternative ways of using gamification, and now we approach learning somehow. You can use collaborative transmedia storytelling. You can, I got my badge now, by the way. I don't want to brag, but that's all my steps here, so I got it now. Health games, when someone wants to learn or improve their health, learn about their health, improve their health, gamification may be applied. It's a very good way to do that. Therapy tool in mental disorders, that has been used also successfully, as well as assessment of cognitive function, memory, for example, in elderly. Now, how do we motivate students with gamification? Maximum enjoyment and engagement at the same time. That's what we aspire to. And this is perhaps one of the more famous examples, the Khan University, where the whole university is set up in a gamification setting. So they use the elements of gamification to develop the students and motivate them to learn. There are, of course, more examples, but what is essential here is that it's user-centered design when you move into someone who wants to learn something new. So it's got to be meaningful. User needs and goals are the primary consideration. It's not primary to get badges so that you can buy a flower, even though that can be nice if you buy it for your wife or friend or partner, but it's about what they need to learn something, master something, and so on. The experiences should be well connected with the underlying non-game setting. So if you create a story for kids, within that story it should be elements of learning, so that they are driven into the story, further into the story, by these gaining and acquiring these experiences. Now, it should focus on introducing elements of play instead of scoring. Scoring could be negative feedback. Oh, I lost, I got a 2 instead of a 3 or something like that. But if you introduce the elements of play, now you've gained knowledge, and you're going to play in a larger playground next time because you did. That's a different feedback, if you would like. Game-based activities should be given in a variety of ways, because we are all different. We are not driven by the same, we don't appeal by the same type of games. So some like this game, some like that. And the ability to also influence the game and change it is also essential. External rewards should be replaced by connections between the non-game activity and needs or goals in the user life. So if you acquire knowledge, it's actually useful. It's going to mean that you will go to the next level. You can get to the game level also as well, which means that you have actually learned something new. Now, effects of the game on the brain of gaming. The gaming is, even though I'm not that frequent a gamer myself, gaming, I can assure you, is healthy for the brain, at least to a limited extent. There are also extremes and that sort of activities that doesn't fit the rule. But if you engage in a game, your brain will also thrive. So the plasticity of the brain will get involved, and you will gain actually more connections between the neurons. That means that also secondary skills will be added to your gaming skills. So you may be more attentive, your speed of mental processing may increase, you may increase your motor skills in your fingers and hands and so on. So it's actually bringing secondary benefits as well. Here are some elements that are used in gamification settings and that can facilitate learning. So still you see the badges, leaderboards, points, progress mechanics. Narrative is very important. Player control, that the player can actually influence the game. Immediate feedback when they do something, so they know if it is right or wrong. Opportunities for collaboration, so join with friends, create and solve the problems. Scaffold learning will increase in challenges, so increasing the level if you would like. Opportunities for mastery and leveling up, and social connections, very important. Now these are examples of how you could do it in the classroom if you're working in a classroom setting. So instead of using academic language, you use game language instead. So it's not about now you're going to get a 3 grade or a 4th grade or A, B or C. You're actually going to become the knight of Nottingham Forest or something like that. So that's the level you're going to reach if you master this. That introduces play into the game, right? Adapting the grading process, same thing here. So instead of letter grade, you use actually rewards or badges or trophies. I mastered the game. I actually conquered the whole country in this game setting. So now I'm going to get official stamp for that. I'm the master of Wonderland. Modifying the structure of the learning environment. That is also in the whole learning environment. You set it up not only as a narrative, but also as a game, if you would like, so that you engage the user to get involved into the reward thinking. Now, this perhaps is one of the most important things when you develop a gamification setting, for whatever purpose it is, the overarching narrative. And you've heard about storytelling. It's all over. Get that story right, get that narrative right, get the user into the story that they like, and there you got to know your target population. This is Duolingo, I mentioned that. It's not much of a story, but it's very basic, obvious, and it's intuitive. It gets to the user very quickly. I don't know how many have tried Duolingo or tries this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you enjoy it? Well, some are nodding. You are nodding. You like it. Yeah. That's good. And do you learn something when you try Duolingo? You learn a language, right? So these are other examples moving more into the academic sphere. There are universities, for example, Cyber Academy in Poland and the University of Worcester, that they have a whole setup online and with this gamification structure in use. Is it useful? Do you actually learn something? Well, this slide says that there's insufficient data to tell, but there are clear studies revealing that the brain gets involved, gets active, and that you learn from a gamification setting. Do you become a better student? That's perhaps a different thing. But I would say there's too little data today to tell. Now, benefits of gamification in learning. I say there's a lot of benefits in this. And it's all about what we talked about, the ownership, the identity, the freedom to fail and try again. It's the fun and joy. It's the opportunities for differentiated instructions and making learning visible. So it becomes something that you live instead of something that you go to because you have to. Also, you can manage the set of subtasks and tasks. You are in control. And you discover your inner drivers of motivation, but you also make use of extrinsic factors. Now, criticism. Some say that extrinsic motivators cause a decrease in intrinsic motivation for learning. Some say it's taking a less serious approach, and some say it's too simplistic. Well, if you want to do this right, make sure it's not. These are my last few slides. It's about retention. So retention is about keeping the interest, maintaining that interest. And how do you do that? There's no simple solution, but there are some basics. This is a curve describing what happens with most products. For example, coming back to this product, I've worn it for a couple of months, but I'm already longing for a new one, right? So maybe one day I drop it. I take something else. I take another brand, perhaps. That's about losing interest, attrition curve. Happens to all activities, actually. This is what happens in the brain. It's a vague and diffuse thing, but actually there are people that very easily lose interest or lose attachment. We can talk about borderline personality if you would like. So you change all the time your interest and your belonging, if you would like. You criticize or you like, and back and forth. And that's also something happening in the brain, even though it may not be a structural change. It is an activity change in the brain. So there is a neural substrate, if you would like, also for retention. And there are several factors which this slide presents here. And motivation is key. So it's got to be value-based. To keep someone still hanging in there, the value's got to be real and intrinsic and developed also. The needs, well, they are the same for everyone. You got to satisfy those basic needs. So know your target population. And the goals, they can change over time. So make sure that there's a variety in the game so that they can aspire to different goals. And what is not mentioned here, novelty. You cannot create a game, let it be, you're going to lose interest in a short while. You have to all put in new elements all the time. Surprise, the element of surprise is essential. And here is a slide that you really don't talk about. You read it if you have the time, but this summarizes several of the elements that are necessary that I've talked about. So it is about diversity and variability. It's about novelty, and it's about goals and values and so on. Self-assessment is also important, that you can assess your skills and it's real what you assess. And also a focus on learning as well as teaching. Maybe you want to teach others, tell others what you're doing and so on. So, to sum up this presentation, I've talked about gamification, the definition of what it is. Talked about motivation, factors influencing it. I talked about the brain, what happens in the brain when you're motivated, the dopamine system, the reward system. Talked about gamification elements, legal aspects, effects of gamification. It does work. And learning and gamification. You do learn more if you do it right. And I talked about retention a bit. So, back to the challenge. Has anyone thought about that challenge? How would you create the game where you both make them learn and make a change? Anyone want to try for the book that I brought with me 4 examples of? Yes, excellent.
You can, if you have a presentation about gamification, you can come up with a challenge at the beginning of your presentation.
You are a winner. I really like that. Really like that. I know. Yes.
I think I would try and build a realistic environment where I let people fail and have an aha experience. And I think the most powerful learning component you can have is to fail and learn from that and do something different going forward. So I think you also said that in the fact that gamification is an environment where you can be allowed to do that without the repercussion of real life environments.
Yeah.
So finding ways to build that into a game, I think, is incredibly powerful.
So that's both also gaining and or sometimes failing, winning and failing, and that will develop you as well as you learn.
Yes.
Yes, excellent example. You'll have a prize for you and an applaud. Any more examples?
Come on, we're
Yes.
on a winning streak here.
I would try to make sure that it's fun to play the game, and
Yeah.
that the person starting the game would know what the prize would be, maybe upfront or just when starting the game.
And that will create both learning and a change.
For me, I would agree. I would assume so, yes.
I think that's good enough. So that's also a prize for you. Excellent.